Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Preet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, and your boy on social media at MMALOTN. This week we're covering a big UFC 319 card which goes down in Chicago, Illinois, and it is headlined by a big-time middleweight title fight between defending champion Dricus du Plessis and the oncoming undefeated wolf Khamzat Chimaev. In the co-main event, we were supposed to get a high-stakes featherweight matchup between Movsar Evloev and UFC debutant Aaron Pico. Unfortunately, an injury to Movsar has pulled him out of the matchup, and a few weeks ago, Lerone Murphy accepted the short notice opportunity and now puts himself in a position where he could potentially find himself in a number one contender fight should he get his hand raised here. But Aaron Pico is a very highly touted prospect coming over from Bellator and has clearly something that he wants to prove here, but should be a banger of a matchup. Solid 14-fight card, but just a note, we have the Ultimate Fighter 33 finale taking place on this card as well, and those two fights will be the opening bouts. I believe we already have the Idris Alibi and Joseph Morales fight booked and ready to go, but tonight, Tuesday night, is when they will be announcing the final finalist who's going to be taking on Rodrigo. I forgot the guy's last name, but I won't be breaking down those fights on this podcast. I will actually release another segment tomorrow, probably Wednesday, when we get odds for both matchups and we actually have both of those fights announced. That will be in a separate podcast. So if you're wondering where those two breakdowns are, check out the MMALOTN Patreon page anytime after Wednesday, and you'll be able to find the breakdowns for those fights right there. All right, 12 fights on this card. Let's quickly do the Lock of the Night and Dog of the Night recap for this past weekend's UFC Vegas 109 card. Then we'll get right into the breakdowns. Lock of the Night, plus money lock of the night. It's always so nice to hit those plus money plays, especially with a 5-unit risk, and that's what we were able to do last week with the Jocelyn Edwards and Priscilla Cachoeira under 2.5 at plus 172. Very happy to hit on that, and when it's all even better when it happens in the first round, so you don't have to sweat it out, and Edwards is able to help us cash that ticket. We went 2-1 over the weekend on Lock of the Night plays, losing on our PFL Africa Lock of the Night play, unfortunately, but we did hit our Octagon MMA Lock of the Night play with Lucia Sabova winning the title. That was a little bit chalky, but then the plus money on the UFC card definitely put us in the profit for Lock of the Night plays this past weekend. That now brings our yearly Lock of the Night record to 41-25 for a 62% hit rate, firmly in the profit now. And then our Dog of the Night play, we actually went 0-4 over the weekend with the UFC's Lock of the Night playing being Angela Hill. It seems like she couldn't overcome the power advantage that Lucindo had that night, and Hill unfortunately coming up short that night. So that now drops our Dog of the Night record to 36-45 for a 44% hit rate. That's definitely been dropping while the Lock of the Night percentage has been rising. And again, we're still in the profit for the Dog of the Night, so I'm happy about that. But I really want to continue working on that Lock of the Night number and see how far we can get it up before the end of the year. All right. Contender Series goes down tonight. So if you're watching this, anytime before 7 p.m. Eastern time, you can quickly jump on over and check out the Contender Series breakdown that I dropped yesterday for you guys, or I believe that it was actually Sunday, like midnight, that I dropped it for you guys. We did great last season, hoping to replicate that again this season, so make sure you guys check that out. I also have 3 tracked plays and official plays on the Lock of the Night Patreon page for that Contender Series card, but that's also where you'll be able to find breakdowns for the LFA and the PFL cards that also go down this Friday. But don't worry, if you're just on the YouTube, you will get breakdowns for those as a video, probably Wednesday for PFL and then Thursday for the LFA. So stay locked into this channel and make sure you hit that subscribe if you haven't already. I'm on my road to 10,000 subscribers, and I'm really hoping by the ending of the Contender Series season, I'll be able to hit it. So if you haven't hit that subscribe button yet on the YouTube page, please do so. I put in years of work into this channel, and I'm finally hoping to crack that 10,000 mark. It's been a slow and steady rise, but I want to urge you guys a little bit more to hit that subscribe button if you have not already. All right. That's pretty much it on the intro and the recap and the plugs. So without further ado, let's get right into these breakdowns. First matchup up is actually a rematch of a fight between Silva, who comes in at -110, taking on Barboza, who comes in at +180 for this flyweight tilt. Now, Barbosa is taking this fight on short notice. That is something to take into consideration. But from all accounts, she has been training and been waiting for a UFC call, and she gets this opportunity to try to go 2-0 against Silva, who finally had her UFC winning streak snapped last time around. It was also a 9-fight winning streak overall. Last time she went up against Viviane Araújo, and after a slow start from Araújo, she was able to nullify the takedowns and submission game of Silva, landing more significant strikes and even having some good positions of her own from that top position against Silva. Silva is a finish or bust fighter with a lot of her fights finishing by submission. She's done a great job in terms of seeking out those submissions and forcing the tap from a lot of her opponents. She's very good with the knee bar. She loves to attack with that as well. Striking doesn't leave a lot to be desired there. That's why you often see her desperation wrestling, and her wrestling, there are some question marks there as well. I think she's been kind of overrated through her UFC run thus far, and I think that's spilling over into this fight, even though she came up short in her last matchup. But now she's taking on Barbosa, who actually defeated her. I think Barbosa might have been the last defeat on Silva's record before Araújo did it last time around. But that night, that was 6 years ago, and Barbosa defeated her on the scorecards. And the interesting thing about that was only the third professional fight for Barbosa, while it was the 13th, I believe, for Silva. So Silva was already firmly into her pro MMA career, while Barbosa was still transitioning over from the BJJ world. And I think the BJJ advantage that she holds in her fights often is why she ends up getting her hand raised. But we saw some of her handiwork last time around against Diana Belbita, where she was able to touch her up on the feet and then just flawlessly mix in a takedown behind it, and then immediately get to full mount, get to that arm triangle choke, and force the tap from Diana Belbita. Barbosa, she's strong, she's physical, she's working on her striking game, she has a decent jab, she's learning to throw with a little bit more power, but it's really her wrestling and her top game BJJ style that makes it so difficult for opponents to get the better of her. I'm very surprised that she finds herself in that +180, +190 range here against Silva. Maybe it has to do with the short notice for Barbosa here, but from all accounts, it seems like she's been training. It seems like she's in shape, and the fact that this fight is taking place at 125 pounds as well makes me believe that she was close enough to the weight that it should not impact her too much in terms of a weight cut. When they fought 6 years ago, it was the jab of Barbosa on the feet and then the top control that she was able to instill while fighting off the submission attempts coming back from Silva. Surely both women have gotten better since then, but I still believe Barbosa is the stronger fighter and will be more physical, and that will allow her to land bigger shots on the feet and then eventually get this fight to the ground and grind it out from that top position against Silva. I'd be very surprised if Silva is able to submit Barbosa here, who is a very crafty BJJ specialist as well, and Silva often ends up fighting off her back if she can't pull off those submissions, maybe because she trusts her submission game a little bit too much, thinking she'll eventually be able to get it. But if she doesn't do it in the first round here, I could see this being a fight where Barbosa ends up controlling the majority of it and grinding this fight out and winning it on the scorecard. So I have to take a shot on her here at underdog odds to kick off this card, or at least the UFC 319 portion of this card. All right, next up in the middleweight division, we got Bryan Battle coming in at -175, going up against Nursultan Ruziboev, who comes in at +150. Now, Battle is on a decent winning streak right now. I believe it's 4 straight wins now. It probably should have been 5, should have had not been for that no contest against Angelosa. But Battle, after missing weight at 170 pounds last time around, is being forced to go back up to 185 pounds where he started his UFC career. I don't know if the weight cuts were getting to him or he just wanted to take this opportunity, but he's still a big and long enough guy that he can be successful at middleweight as long as he puts the weight back on correctly. High volume, high pressure fighter. He really just likes to keep that pressure on his opponents, whether it's with the clinch, forward pressure, and output. And then he slowly starts to build upon his performances as he goes deeper into water, deeper into the waters of a fight, and then really start to turn it up in the second and third rounds to get his opponents out of there. He had a bit of a slow start against Randy Brown last time around, and then he took a unentertaining approach against, or a very boring approach in the second and third rounds by tying Randy Brown up against the cage and getting off on some dirty boxing and control time there. Didn't win any fans that night, but we know Bryan Battle normally brings the entertainment and violence, so I'll give him that pass in that Brown fight to try to squeeze out that decision after a slow start that he had. He's going up against Nursultan Ruziboev, who's looking to build upon a 2-fight winning streak, most recently pulling off a decision victory over Dustin Stoltzfus. Now, that was a fight where I believe 2 judges scored that first round for Stoltzfus, and then in the second round, it was seeming like it was going to be Stoltzfus' fight again as he had top position, but then Ruziboev was able to pull off a bit of a scramble, and Stoltzfus ended up jumping the guillotine and allowing Ruziboev to grind out the rest of that round and snatch the momentum back in his favor, and at that point, it seemed like Stoltzfus was kind of broken and allowed Ruziboev to just dictate the pace for the rest of that fight. So there are holes in Ruziboev's game. We saw Joaquin Buckley take advantage of it in terms of mixing in the takedowns at opportune moments and keeping him on his back. He has a eye-popping 36-9-2 record, so he has a ton of experience. But if you really audit and go through a lot of his earlier fights before the UFC, he's fighting a lot of scrubs, so there might have been some record padding going on there, but the guy brings the violence. I believe he's finished pretty much almost all of his wins. I believe 34 or 33 of his wins have come inside the distance, so he's definitely a finisher. And a lot of those finishes coming under that 1.5 round mark. Anytime he's gone to a decision, his record is now 3-6-2. But again, that's usually not that viable at this level if you can't put together a good enough body of work, especially if the finishes don't end up coming. He's long, lanky, powerful, tried to fight at 170 pounds in the past as well, similar to Bryan Battle, but it seems like you're going to start to settle in at 185 pounds. I lean Battle, though. I think his high pressure, I think his clinch game, I think him pinning Ruziboev up against the cage, that is definitely a viable option here. I think we'll see Battle land some takedowns, and I think from there he'll keep that pressure on Ruziboev. I think he breaks him down. That could either lead to a third round finish for Battle, or he just puts together a good enough body of work to just wear Ruziboev down and win this fight on the scorecards. Ruziboev is capable of a finish, but I just think Battle is too good. He'll roll with the shots well enough, and then he'll be in close enough so Ruziboev can't get off on too heavy of shots. But Battle should be in the driver's seat for the majority of this matchup, and I think he wins it on the scorecards. All right. Next up in the lightweight division, we got Edson Barboza coming back up to 155 pounds, coming in at -150, going up against Drakkar Klose, who comes in at +130. Now, starting off on the Barboza side of things, he did pick up a main event victory. I believe it was last year against Sodiq Yusuff. After nearly getting finished in that first round, he tapped into his veteran experience and was able to grind out the rest of that fight, rounds 2-5, outstriking Yusuff, who seemed to have blown his gas tank in that first round. Unfortunately for Barboza, he was unable to follow up on that and earn his third straight victory as he came up short against Lerone Murphy, who did a great job in terms of mixing the martial arts, from landing better strikes against Barboza to mixing it up in the clinch, landing a few takedowns, getting control time. It just seemed like Barboza's circuits were overwhelmed, and Murphy did a great job in terms of just utilizing that overall game to muzzle the Muay Thai approach that we normally see from Barboza. 39 years old. It makes sense why he's deciding to come up to 155 pounds. Something to note, he was scheduled to fight Steve Garcia, I believe, back in February at 145 pounds. I believe he sustained some sort of injury, and now he's deciding not to go back to 145 pounds. A lot of people had some concern for him going down to featherweight when he first did it, but the guy never missed weight. And, his durability for the most part really held up. So we got to give him credit for that. But at 39 years old, in the twilight of his career, it really makes sense for him to come back up to 155 pounds. It's not like he's going to fight for the title at all, but, he might be able to still get some good performances out of himself, usually fueled by that Muay Thai heavy approach and those fast kicks and strikes that he brings to the table. Now, he's going up against Drakkar Klose, who, in my opinion, has been one of the more underrated lightweights on the roster. Before going into his Joel Alvarez fight back in December, he had a 9-2 3-2 record with the promotion. His second loss came at the hands of Beneil Dariush in that crazy back and forth slugfest that produced that crazy reaction from the commentary booth with DC and Rogan and Anik all falling over each other. And it was unfortunately Klose that was on the receiving end of that crazy knockout. But he was one punch away from landing that big shot on Dariush and putting him away too. So I think he got a little bit carried away in the moment there and ended up paying for it. But he did manage to bounce back with 4 straight victories. His last win coming over Joaquim Silva, showcasing good fight IQ. He did get hurt in that fight, but he managed to keep his awareness high enough that he was able to survive that onslaught and eventually still go on to win that fight. But then he took on Joel Alvarez, who we know is just a monster at 155 pounds and can finish pretty much anybody that the UFC throws at him. And Jakar Klose was unfortunately at the wrath of Alvarez that night. Klose is a solid fighter, training out of the MMA lab, I believe, mixes up the martial arts very well, has an underrated striking game, but it's really his clinch and grinding wrestling approach that has allowed him to really pull out some of these victories. And I think he's going to have to tap into a lot of that here against Barboza and try to follow a similar game plan to what Lerone Murphy did to Barboza. Now, I think Murphy is better than Klose, don't get me wrong, but I think Klose is still capable of getting that grind on, getting that clinch game going, getting those takedowns, and really just wearing on Barboza so that Barboza can't get off on big enough strikes to make Klose pay for it. So this might be close early. You might be, clinching your ass a little bit in that first round if you do end up pulling the trigger on Klose here. But if you can squeeze past that first round, I think this is a matchup that very much favors Jakar Klose. He's the better overall mixed martial artist. May not be as dangerous for a finish, but is still a guy that can go out there and put it on Barboza and still win this fight on the scorecard. So I'm going to go Klose and Klose by decision. All right, next up, in the lightweight division, once again, we got Chase Hooper coming in at minus 335, going up against Alexander Hernandez, who comes in at plus 275. Now, if you were to see these odds a few years ago, you'd be, chomping at the bit to throw that underdog price on Alexander Hernandez. But Chase Hooper has absolutely flourished inside the UFC and has really turned into a man at this point. Coming into the UFC so young, about 4 or 5 years ago, now 25 years old, finding himself on a 5-fight winning streak, finishing the likes of Vyacheslav Borshev, Clay Guida, and even Jordan Levitt. You can see the aggressiveness and confidence really growing in him. A lot of it also had to do with his lack of physicality at the time. He's starting to grow into his body. He has a 6'1" frame with a 74-inch reach. That's a big frame for lightweight, and he holds it very well. So I'm glad that he's finally starting to fill out his body, and that strength improvement is really going to help him in where he is usually best, and that's with his BJJ and really putting guys into uncomfortable positions and trying to finish them. After a close first round against Jim Miller, he started to run away with it in the second and third rounds with his ability to put Miller into these bad positions. He was always one step ahead in terms of the scrambles. He was able to get off on a couple of submission attempts, a couple spots to land some ground and pound, but the kid is really growing and becoming what a lot of people expected him to be earlier on in his career. He's going up against Alexander Hernandez, where it's kind of the opposite, right? He splashed on to the UFC scene with a quick knockout victory as a short notice UFC debutant, knocking out Beneil Dariush, but it's not been the best for him as of late. He has an 8-7 overall record in the UFC. He's 5-6 since the COVID era. Currently riding a 2-fight winning streak. The last fight, I did try to fade him with Kurt Holobaugh. I believe it was 1-1 on at least 2 scorecards going into that third round. And I really expected the strongest round for Holobaugh to be that third round. But credit to Hernandez, a guy that normally suffers from cardio issues, was able to pull off multiple takedowns in that final round and controlled 4.5 minutes out of that 5 minutes and end up grinding that fight out to win the fight on the scorecards. Hernandez normally relies on big explosions and power early, and then from there, if he can't get the early finish, then he starts to rely on some of his wrestling. That's going to be hard to do against a guy like Chase Hooper, who wants the fight to be on the ground. Even on his back, he's very crafty in terms of throwing up submissions, disrupting his opponent's balance, causing sweeps, reversals, get-ups even. But I think we'll see Hooper take a similar approach to what he did against Vyacheslav Borshev. That was another fight where he was at a bit of a striking disadvantage, but he utilized and weaponized a chaotic, aggressive approach with his striking, crowding the space of Borshchev, dropping him, which is something that I don't think a lot of people were expecting. And then from there, he was able to get to a submission game. Now, there was a bit of some controversy surrounding the submission against Borshchev. Borshchev didn't end up tapping. The referee thought he went to sleep, but still, that fight was one-sided the entire way. And unless Hernandez lands a big shot on Hooper here early and gets him out of there within the first 90 seconds, I think we'll see Hooper take a similar approach where he just crowds the space of Hernandez, tries to put up a high-activity, high-volume fight, because those are usually the ones that cause Hernandez to start slowing down. And I think that we'll see Hooper be very successful with that. So, the chalk, I'm not a huge fan of it. Maybe, some some Hooper props, which might be a little bit juiced as well. The under 2.5, roughly around -105, that's something that's definitely grabbing my eye, whether it's Hernandez landing that early knockout or Hooper eventually wearing Hernandez down and then finding that submission. I absolutely believe that Hooper, if he spends at least the first 10 minutes on the ground with Hernandez, he should be able to find that submission. So I like the under 2.5. I'm going to go with Chase Hooper, and I think he wins this fight by submission. I will say Hernandez by round 1 KO at plus 1,300 is not a bad hedge opportunity either. Our next up, women's strawweights going at it here as we have Jessica Andrade coming in at plus 120, going up against Lupita Godinez, who comes in at minus 140. Now, starting off on the Andrade side of things, she may have the most diverse resume for a women's mixed martial artist in terms of the amount of fighters that she's faced, the different types of opponents she's faced, and a lot of that has to do with her ability to jump between 125 pounds and 115 pounds. It's starting to become clear that 125 is probably not where she should be fighting if she wants to get anywhere close to a title shot or anything, especially last time around as we saw her get ragdolled by Jazz Davicius and eventually submitted quickly after. Tatiana Suarez did the same thing as well, even though I believe that fight was actually at 115 pounds. But she struggles against fighters that are usually good with wrestling and good control, have good strength as well. With her, it's power striking, blitz in the pocket with wide winging hooks. She has some decent wrestling of her own, but I don't believe too much in her controlling ability. But it just comes down to just trying to nullify opponents, trying to take her to the ground and just keep fights in the stand-up realm where she just can let go with her big strikes. Lupita Godinez now, she did manage to avoid a 3-fight losing streak last time as she was able to pick up a decision victory over Julia Pilastri. But even that fight looked a little bit sketchy, especially late. Godinez benefited from a couple takedowns in the first and second rounds to grind out that fight. But in the third round, she was unable to get to her takedowns and was forced to strike against a better striker. And we saw her, looking desperate in certain spots. But luckily, she saw the final bell and was still able to get her hand raised. She is not the fighter that I thought she was going to be when she first came into the UFC. I thought she was going to be a fighter that would eventually get to a title shot, maybe be a champion. She comes from a wrestling background. She has good wrestling entries, has good control from the top side. Her striking is obviously improving as well. But losing to the likes of Verna Jandiroba, to Mackenzie Dern, is just a big red flag for me. In those fights, you would expect her wrestling background to benefit her, but she just couldn't get out of some of these bad positions. And then she seemed a little bit muzzled and scared from the grappling that was going to be coming back her way. So she just couldn't get off on her strikes either. Here against Andrade, she probably doesn't want to strike with Andrade for too long, because once Andrade gets into her groove, she's probably going to start touching Godinez up. Godinez needs takedowns, but I don't think she needs to be desperate with it. If she moves well enough from range, utilizes a 1-2 down the pipe, stays moving, stays pivoting, doesn't allow Andrade to get off on a stationary target, she should be able to mix in some good takedowns behind that. Then she needs to try to find control for, 1 minute, 1.5 minute, 2 minutes, not completely wear herself out so that she ends up being ripe for the picking in the third round for Andrade, who's clearly going to be just marching her down and looking to put her away. So, if this fight happened before the Jandiroba and Dern fights, I probably would have gone lock of the night deep on Godinez. But seeing some of the flaws in her game, seeing that, she doesn't look the greatest in the third rounds if she can't secure takedowns, it leads me to believe that Andrade might be able to land some big shots, really hurt Godinez, maybe break her morale. And especially in that third round, maybe Andrade can really put together a barrage and cause Godinez to want to hit the door and hit the exit. So, the prediction with low confidence is going to be Godinez. I think she'll get those takedowns in the first 2 rounds to grind this fight out. That third round is going to be hellacious. Maybe targeting Andrade round 3 props might be a good way to go about it. But I think for the most part, we'll see Godinez get her takedowns, stay safe enough, and end up winning this fight on the scorecards. All right. Middleweights going up next here, where we got Gerald GM3 Meerschaert coming in at plus 185, going up against Michal Oleksiejczuk, who comes in at minus 220. Now, starting off on the Meerschaert side of things, this 37-year-old has a plethora of mixed martial arts experience. I believe he has 56 professional fights. This will be his 57th professional mixed martial arts fight. 37 wins. I believe 29 of his 30 wins. 29 of his 37 wins coming by submission, but he currently rides a 2-fight losing streak. The first of those losses came to Reinier de Ridder, who pretty much finds himself in a number 1 contender spot. But that was a fight that was 1-1 going into the third round. And de Ridder just hit another gear, and he was able to find that submission against Meerschaert. And then last time around against Berat Tavares, he just could not get to his grappling. He could not get to his wrestling. He could not get to his jiu-jitsu. Outside of the third round, where he just held Berat Tavares up against the cage, tried getting his back numerous times, he just got beat up in the first 2 rounds by the superior striker, and unfortunately was defeated on the scorecards. We know what Meerschaert's game is all about. He wants to smother you with his grappling, try to get to a submission spot, and try to force the tap. On the feet, he throws with some power, has some decent kicks as well, but he's just a little bit slow. He's a little bit plodding and often ripe for the picking by superior strikers. Now, he's going up against a guy, Michal Oleksiejczuk, who successfully avoided a 4-fight losing streak and ultimately saved his UFC job when he was able to get that knockout victory over Cedricus Dumas. He knew he was really up against it, and a large part of his success, I think, came from the fact that he moved his training camp down to Brazil and started training alongside a former opponent of his in Caio Bahayo at the Fighting Nerds training camp, and I think that's done wonders for him. He has a very aggressive boxing heavy style where he digs to the body and rips shots up to the forehead or to the head of his opponents. But he has fallen short against guys that can take him to the ground and look for those submission opportunities. However, I think he made a great choice by going over to the Fighting Nerds because I think they can take his style and craft him into being a better mixed martial artist. And I think we saw a little bit of that against Dumas. He was still stalking his opponent, but he was very methodical with where he placed his shots, when he placed his shots, the combinations he was throwing, the punches he was throwing. It was all very impressive. Now here against Meerschaert, he's going to have to do the same thing, but be wary of the eventual takedowns that are coming his way as well. But I think that we'll see him just stalk Meerschaert methodically, pick him apart from distance, probably use a lot of jabs, try to keep Meerschaert at the end of his punches so that if he does see a takedown attempt coming, he can, easily get his down block in place, he can get a sprawl going, he can pivot off and then get back into a striking stance. And I think the Fighting Nerds will definitely help him in terms of achieving those spots. So, initially I was a little bit surprised to see Oleksiejczuk in that minus 200 range. It's starting to make sense the more that I'm thinking about it. The spot that I'm eyeing though is the over 1.5. Now I think a lot of that will come from the paced aggressiveness from Oleksiejczuk, because I think he's going to know that Meerschaert's trying to look for that clinch, trying to look for that takedown, and that will cause Oleksiejczuk to be a little bit more muzzled than we normally see. I think we'll see him touch up Meerschaert from distance, and then as Meerschaert starts slowing down in the second and third rounds, that's where I think we'll see Oleksiejczuk really start to let go with the combinations. And I think that will probably take 7.5 minutes. That constant threat of Meerschaert trying to close the distance won't allow Oleksiejczuk to overextend and throw too much power. He'll just be pitter-pattering Meerschaert from distance, at least in my opinion, and then eventually opening up once he can see that Meerschaert is slowing down. So the over 1.5 being around that even money line at minus 110, I think is worth a consideration here. I'm expecting a finish, but I think that finish probably comes in the second or third round. And there's a crazy gap between the round 2 KO and round 3 KO for Oleksiejczuk, at least according to BetOnline. I saw round 2 KO at plus 425 and round 3 KO at plus 1600. I may take a little bit of a nibble on that last spot. And I know Meerschaert is normally the round 2, round 3 guy, but if we get the Fighting Nerd style of Oleksiejczuk, this would be a slow burn to eventually lead to that late finish here from Oleksiejczuk. So give me Oleksiejczuk by round 3 knockout. All right. Middleweights going at it next here as we have King Green coming in at plus 125 going up against Diego Ferreira, who comes in at minus 145. Now, it's kind of been a tough go for Bobby Green as of late, or King Green, I should say. This is a guy who used to rely on his durability. Before his fight against Islam Makhachev, I believe that was back in 2020, 7 of Green's past 8 losses or prior 8 losses to the Makhachev fight had come by decision. Dustin Poirier was the only guy to knock him out in that run. But since then, his last 5 losses now have all come by finish. And the last one being kind of, nasty, where he got just completely dummied and stiffed by Maurizio Hoffi, who landed that beautiful spinning back kick to put his lights out. If you guys remember, Jalen Turner put out King Green's lights a couple fights back as well. He did manage to bounce back from that knockout loss to Turner by putting on a classic Green performance by touching Jim Miller up for 15 minutes at UFC 300. And then he put himself into a submission against Paddy Pimblett, very un-Green-like. He has some decent fight IQ and knows where he is strongest. And obviously, he was a better striker than Pimblett. But there was something that Pimblett was doing that drew out that takedown attempt from Green, and that pretty much put him into a submission where Pimblett kind of set a trap and he sprung it perfectly. Couldn't really get to Huffy. Huffy showcased good footwork, good movement, and then eventually that nasty knockout. But, given the matchup, Green can still be a successful fighter. He has good cardio, good combination striking, good output, good volume. It just all comes down to his durability and if he can eat shots like he used to. He ate some big shots from Jim Miller, but it was the output that eventually really started to muzzle the offense of Miller that night. Now, Diego Ferreira, another guy that had an unfortunate stretch, I believe, back in 2021 where he went 0-3. I believe 2022 he was on the sidelines, came back in 2023, had a 2-fight winning streak, big wins over Michael Johnson in a fight where he was getting pieced up for about 6 minutes before he uncorked a big bomb and got Johnson out of there. And then Mateusz Rąbecki fight where he started slow again, but really started to pick up the pace in the second and third rounds and ended up getting the finish in the dying seconds of the third round, showcasing his grit, durability, and just straight out savageness. Let's just say it as it is. Unfortunately, he was unable to unleash that against Grant Dawson earlier this year, who was able to get to his takedowns, control Ferreira for nearly 11 minutes out of the 15 that they shared the cage together. I believe it was 6 takedowns that Grant had landed and kept him on his back there. That's where Ferreira starts to struggle. When he's fighting technically superior strikers or technically superior grapplers, he ends up coming up short in those spots, especially when those fighters, don't have bad cardio, especially when those fighters don't have sketchy durability. He might find himself behind more often than not. And Green is one of those guys that can definitely exploit that. Green is a guy that can put together a similar type of performance to what Michael Johnson was able to do against Ferreira, utilizing a high output, high volume, a lot of striking pace, but it just comes down to whether his chin can eat those big shots that are inevitably going to be coming back from Diego Ferreira. Normally I don't like leaning on guys that just need that one shot, especially if they're the favorite. If you're giving me underdog odds on the guy that has a little bit more paths to victory and the better minute winning style, I'm going to go with the guy that is the underdog. And that's what I'm going to do for this matchup. I am going to pick King Green. I'm going to wait for the line though. At plus 125, it's a decent number, but are we going to see some Ferreira action start to come in and make Green a bigger underdog? Or will that Green love come in and just force him closer to a pick'em? If it stays around plus 125, I may end up passing, but that's more so for my heart rate, right? That's more so for me not wanting to be on the edge of my seat this entire matchup, hoping that Green is able to survive any big shot that Ferreira lands on him. So I'm going to go Green here. I think he wins by decision, but I'd be very wary considering his possible deteriorating durability, the big shots that will obviously land from Ferreira. But I'm going to go Green. I'm going to go Green by decision. All right. That brings us to our main card now, which starts off in the flyweight division as we have former title challengers Tim Elliott coming in at plus 250, going up against Kai Asakura, who comes in at minus 300. Now, starting off on the Tim Elliott side of things, it's been a while since we've seen him inside the cage. I believe his last matchup was actually in December of 2023, where he was able to pull off a submission victory over Sumo Darji, a fight that he actually took on short notice. That was on the back end of actually a loss that he suffered at the hands of Mohamed Mokaev, and that was a matchup where he was actually up on scorecards going into that third round, but unfortunately got caught in a submission by Mokaev and was forced to tap. But Elliott is one of the more, recognizable names in the flyweight division, one of the more tenured guys in the division, and you often see his name sprinkled out throughout the all-time flyweight stats and UFC record books. It's a lot to do with his high volume, high pressure, ton of wrestling, good control, crafty game, just awkward game all around, and I think that's what usually makes him very hard for a lot of opponents to deal with him, and I think that's why he's been able to pull off some upsets in the past that people were surprised about, namely the Tagir Ulanbekov fight. But just take a listen to some of these records that he holds for the all-time UFC flyweight record book. He's first all-time in takedowns landed at 59. He's first all-time in total strikes landed at 1,786. Second all-time in control time at 1 hour, 10 minutes, and 39 seconds. And second all-time in top position time at 1 hour, 1 minute, and 27 seconds. And he has only one more fight than the champion, right? So he's up there. He's doing what he needs to do. He gets takedowns. He's able to control positions. He's able to scramble well. His cardio is normally on pace. His striking is very awkward and hard to get a beat on. And he's only been finished once in his career in terms of knockouts. And he's going to have to try avoiding another knockout here against Kai Asakura, who we know loves to seek the knockout, be very flashy with the striking style, and try to implement his power as much as he can. Unfortunately, he came up short in his UFC debut as he was thrusted right into a UFC title shot taken on Alexandre Pantoja, and Pantoja tried a few takedowns early, was unsuccessful with it, decided to strike with Asakura and got the better of Asakura there, and then in the second round we saw Pantoja get right to his grappling, got the back of Asakura, and eventually sunk in that choke to get the finish, and that's kind of where Asakura struggled throughout his career. Even his loss against Hiromasa Yugikoba, Kubo, getting grinded out in a lot of that fight too. We have seen some improvements, and he's doing a better job in terms of some of his takedown defense. But once he gets taken down, there are some question marks in terms of his ability to work back to his feet. He's explosive. He's energetic. Obviously, he has a 7-year youth advantage here against Tim Elliott. But to see Elliott at plus 250 is kind of mind-boggling to me, especially with the stats that I laid out for you guys a little bit earlier, and knowing that style is usually the one that's successful against a guy like Kai Asakura. So, I'm going to lean Elliott here. I know the unorthodox power striking approach of Asakura as well is very dangerous to Elliott. I know Elliott's coming off of a layoff as well. He's 38 years old, but he has the tools to pull off the upset here. If he stays conscious and if he can get those awkward takedowns and put Asakura into some bad positions, this is a very winnable fight for him. So I'm going to go Elliott here. This may be a very unpopular pick, but I see too much value on the Elliott side, and he has the path to victory. Just needs to get to it, keep his awkward style, get in on those takedowns, and get that control time. So I'm going to go Elliott and Elliott by decision. All right, next up in the middleweight division, we got Jared the Killer Gorilla Cannonier coming in at plus 160, going up against Michael Venom Page, who comes in at minus 185. Now, starting off on the Cannonier side of things, he was able to pull off an upset victory in his last main event showing against Gregory Rodriguez. It was tough for him in the first round, but it was clear that Rodriguez was hitting a cardio wall in that second round, and Cannonier's veteran experience took over, and he was able to grind out Rodriguez for the next few rounds before he eventually found a finish at the opening seconds of the fourth round. That helped him snap a 2-fight losing streak, which he had at the hands of Nasruddin Imavov and Kyle Bahalio, and I believe actually his last 5 fights, maybe even past that, have all been main event spots as well. So a guy that the UFC has obviously leaned on in fight night opportunities. Now he gets this this pay-per-view spot where he's taken on a tough very elusive striker in Michael Venom Page. But just quickly capping off with Cannonier, he's a jack of all trades, has good striking, has decent power, can mix in the grappling when he needs to. He doesn't excel at any one thing. I think a lot of his success has largely come from his athleticism, power, and explosivity. But technically speaking, there are some things that guys can take advantage of him in, and that's where we saw Nasruddin Imavov get the better of him. That's where we saw Kyle Bahayo, who, a lot of people thought he needed takedowns in that fight against Cannonier, but he actually used a disciplined striking approach to pick Cannonier apart and win that fight on the scorecards there over 25 minutes. So very impressive from Bahayo there, and just kind of goes to show where the ceiling of Cannonier is. Now, he's going to be very much up against it here against Michael Venom Page, who's one of the most elusive and tricky strikers to fight in the UFC, or just in the MMA world, period. This is going to be his fourth fight with the promotion. He was successful in his UFC debut by outpointing Kevin Holland. He was unable to get away from the grappling of Ian Machado Gary, although I thought he performed a lot better than I thought he would have. And then he was able to outpoint and hand Shara Magomedov the first loss of his professional career as well. And I'm now 3-0 in betting Michael Venom Page fights in the UFC. Betting him over Kevin Holland, fading him with Ian Machado Gary, because I think a lot of people are overlooking the grappling route that Gary could have taken that night, and Gary was successful with it. That third round was just holding on by a hair, but Gary was able to get it done. And then Magomedov, I thought that was a clear underdog spot that needed to take advantage of, and Page proved to be true there. Here against Cannonier, I think Page can do it once again. I think he is the rightful favorite. I think his speed, which even at 38, showing that it's still there, his elusiveness, his footwork, his ability to land those straight shots down the pipe, I think that's going to catch Cannonier off the guard repeatedly, and I think that could actually lead to Page finding the knockout. I think it's going to frustrate Cannonier a lot. It's going to cause Cannonier to make some mistakes, and I think Page will capitalize on it all, and I think that will lead to Page actually finding the knockout. Cannonier may look to grapple, but I don't think he has the ability to keep Page in a bad spot for a long time. I think Page will work out of those spots pretty quickly. I think he'll stuff most of the takedowns as well. You'll see a lot of them coming, especially with his perpetual movement that he showcases from distance. And then I think we'll see Page just do what he does best. Land those effective shots, those precise shots, and I think it'll eventually lead to a knockout here. So I'm going to go MVP by knockout, probably within the first 10 minutes. All right. Fun welterweight matchup up next here, where we got Jeff Hands of Steel Neal coming in at plus 205, going up against Carlos Prates, who comes in at minus 240. Now, starting off on the Jeff Neal side of things, who is coming off a knockout victory over Rafael Dos Anjos. However, that was via injury. But it seemed like the knockout was coming because Neal hurt Dos Anjos numerous times in those opening minutes, and it was that last knockdown that injured the knee of Dos Anjos, which caused a stoppage to the fight. But that allowed Neal to snap the two-fight losing streak that he had at the hands of Shavkat Rakhmonov and Ian Machado Gary. But Neal put up a damn good fight against both of those guys as well, even though he came up on the losing end. Now, he's not the guy that a lot of people were expecting him to be, especially after his 2020 loss to Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. I think a lot of that had to do with some sort of illness that he was dealing, but he has been showing in his last several fights that he still can pack up a ton of power, still has fast hands, still has good durability, and I think that's going to definitely help him in this matchup against Carlos Prates. Fast hands, big power, great coaching with Saif Sayoud as well, good experience, and just speed. The speed plus power makes him very deadly against a lot of opponents. Now, he's going up against Carlos Prates, who had his winning streak snapped last time by Ian Machado Gary in a main event clash earlier this year. Gary utilized great footwork, output, good range management, and really kept Prates guessing, especially with some of the takedown attempts that he was shooting. Even though it didn't seem like he was trying to take Prates down with some of those attempts, it was more so to keep Prates thinking. It was about halfway through the fourth round where Prates finally hurt Machado Gary, and the momentum started to swing Prates' way, but unfortunately he was unable to get Machado Gary out of there, and Gary had done enough through the first three rounds to win that fight. Prates, dangerous Muay Thai specialist. If the tattoo across his chest doesn't already tell you that, you can obviously see it with the way that he fights. But a lot of his win condition usually relies on him getting the finish. There have been a few fights where he's been behind on the scorecards, or at least behind his fighter, and then comes back and finds the finish, most notably that UFC debut against Trevin Giles. Now, surely he's gotten better. Obviously, being with the fighting nerds and, absorbing all the knowledge from those guys, he's only going to become a better fighter. But I think he will struggle against guys that have good enough striking and can kind of avoid the power that he brings to the table and avoid the knockouts that he's been dishing out. And Neal is a guy very hard to put away. I believe he's never been finished by knockout. Actually, he's been finished once by knockout about 8.5 years ago by Kevin Holland. But since then, durability has looked insane. Ate some big shots from Shavkat Rakhmonov, stayed in that fight. So if his durability holds up here, this is a very winnable fight for Geoff Neal, and I'm going to have to lean on that Geoff Neal side. I think his speed, his power will cause Prates some issues, and I think that he can land some big enough shots here that he may even be able to produce a finish. But I'm going to go Neal and Neal by decision. It all depends on his durability holding up. And if he has the chops, which I think he does, this plus 205 will end up looking like a steal. So I'm going to go Neal. This will be an unpopular pick. I don't doubt it. We often see it with these guys that have a lot of hype around them like Prates, even though it's kind of sizzled off a little bit with that loss that he took at the hands of Machado Gary. But, Neal, maybe overrated earlier in his career, but now very underrated in this stage of his career. And I think he reminds people that he's still very dangerous. And I think he outpoints Prates en route to a decision victory. All right. Co-main event time. Cannot wait for this one. We got in the featherweight division, Lerone Murphy coming in at plus 160, going up against Aaron Pico, who comes in at minus 185. Now, starting on the Lerone Murphy side of things, 16-0-1, most recently having a dominant decision, somewhat of a dominant decision victory over Josh Emmett from earlier this year. He was able to defeat Dan Ige before that, won his first headlining spot with Edson Barboza last year as well. The issue has been that he just can't finish fights. He's a bit of a decision machine ever since coming to the UFC. I think he only has one fight that he's won by finish inside the UFC. I could be off on that, but I think it's just one. But he's a very well-rounded mixed martial artist. He's a guy that has good patient striking, good speed, good movement, can rely on his takedowns when he needs to try to get some breaths in, to try to, manage his gas tank a little bit better, really try to get his opponent thinking about what's coming back their way. And his fight IQ is high level. The issue that I have is there are some fights that are a lot closer than they should be, and he's just edging some of them out. That Dan Ige fight, I think it was 1-1 going into the final round, and, Ige was able to get some very solid positions, some, significant positions as well, and there were just moments where Murphy was able to pull off a reversal and then get that position back. But he's not going to be able to do that against better fighters or guys that are in that top five. And that's where I think we'll start to see the ceiling of Lerone Murphy. With a certain path, he may be able to find himself in a title fight, but facing something like, facing Aaron Pico or facing Movsar Evloev may show us the ceiling of Lerone Murphy a lot sooner. The other aspect for Murphy here, taking this fight on short notice, probably not the best, right? He doesn't have to go the full 5 rounds as Aaron Pico was originally scheduled when he was supposed to fight Movsar Evloev on this card. So there's that. But still, 3 rounds, traveling cross country, having to make the weight, coming in on, Monday or Tuesday of fight week as well. I believe he came in on Monday of fight week, which, coming in for a big fight like this from overseas, I feel like a fighter should come in a little bit earlier than that. That could hinder his performance. And he's going up against a very hungry Aaron Pico, who's trying to make a name for himself in his UFC debut. And it seems the UFC believes in him as well, because they put him in this big spot opportunity, originally against Movsar Evloev, who could easily be fighting for the title right now. There's a reason they made this co-main event 5 rounds originally, because they believe that Aaron Pico has the capabilities of really, making some noise in the featherweight division. Now, there have been some other PFL Tour transplants that are, that came up short in their debuts. Most notably, especially recently, Patchy Mix, Patricio Pitbull, both coming up short against Mario Bautista and Yair Rodriguez, respectively. But I think Aaron Pico is closer to his prime and much more well-rounded than those guys put together. Pico originally coming from a wrestling background, but his striking has come together so well that he can go out there and strike with opponents completely and still be fine. Very fast, has a ton of power, insanely athletic, very good durability, or I should say, very good durability, at least this stage of his career. Very good cardio as well. He's on a solid run right now. What's the run that he's on? He's 9-1 over his last 10 fights, with that one loss coming to Jeremy Kennedy. It was actually a shoulder injury. He popped his shoulder out of place in that first round and was unable to get it back in place. Thus, he lost that fight by injury. But that was a fight that he was likely going to win. So, stylistically speaking, I think this is a very winnable matchup for Aaron Pico. Because again, Lerone Murphy, when he finds himself in a little bit of trouble in the striking realm, or if he finds himself in spots where he needs to catch his breath, he usually relies on his wrestling. But there's no way he's out wrestling a guy like Aaron Pico. Pico is in prime condition, training alongside Khamzat Chimaev and Arman Tsarukyan for this matchup. We know what to expect from him. I get that he has not fought anybody at the level of Lerone Murphy. I get that this is his UFC debut. I get that historically, especially this year, guys coming over from PFL Tour have not done that great against UFC competition. But it all comes down to styles. And people that are back in the Murphy side are mainly leaning on those statistics rather than how these guys actually clash from a stylistic perspective, and also the short notice nature of it and everything. So I think this is a very winnable fight for Pico. I think this is a fight where he can dictate the pace with the striking. I think he can get the better of Murphy in the wrestling. I think Pico wins this fight pretty much everywhere. I'm going to go with Pico pretty dominantly here, and I think he ends up winning this fight on the scorecards. I'll say that about Lerone Murphy. He's durable. Maybe has a few cardio issues in this fight because of the short notice nature of it. Maybe Pico is able to muster up a finish later on in this matchup. But for the sake of predictions here, I'm going to go Pico by decision, but I feel pretty damn good about him. And it seems like the public is too, because this line is slowly starting to climb over the last 48 hours. All right. That brings us to our middleweight championship headliner here, as Dricus Du Plessis comes in at plus 195, looking to defend his title for the third time, going up against Khamzat Chimaev, who comes in at minus 220. Now, Du Plessis has been, I don't want to call it a Cinderella story, right? Like, the guy's solid. He's very athletic, came in with a very solid record. I think he only had 2 losses before coming to the UFC. Undefeated in the UFC, actually. So, yeah, he only had 2 losses coming into the UFC. I believe was the first guy to beat Roberto Soldic, who was just doing the damn thing over there in KSW, although Soldic did end up getting his revenge. But since coming to the UFC, Du Plessis continuously goes out there, finishing the majority of his opponents, which caused a lot of people to say, hey, this guy probably has a cardio issue, and there have been fights where he goes into deeper water and still pulls out the finish. So he's kind of just started to shut people up in terms of that narrative, especially in his last 3 fights, which all have gone into championship rounds. Defeated Sean Strickland twice by decision, and Strickland is known to be a bit of a cardio machine. And then finishing Israel Adesanya in the 4th round of their matchup. So I think we can kind of throw out the cardio narrative here on Du Plessis, but I think a lot of his success comes just from his just raw physicality, like his strength, his speed, his explosiveness, his power. That's kind of led to him getting getting away with a lot of these wins, because he can just overpower opponents in a lot of these situations. His durability has held up very well, so we have to credit him for that. But I think it was Israel Adesanya and Robert Whittaker who put it perfectly. This guy is the best worst fighter, because technically speaking, he doesn't really do anything great. It's just the power that he can put behind it makes him makes up for the lack of technique in a lot of his maneuvers and a lot of his things that he's trying to implement inside the cage, and it's worked out for him. So who are we to say to him like, hey, get more technical? Maybe the fact that he is not technical is the reason why he's so successful, because he has the physical traits to back it up. So that's definitely something to take into consideration whenever breaking down Du Plessis fights. But this is clearly his toughest fight to date, right? 14-0, Khamzat Chimaev, going out there and ragdolling most of his opponents. Only Gilbert Burns and Kamaru Usman were able to give him a bit of a fight. All the other guys really struggled or were quickly finished. Most notably, that last win that he had last year over Robert Whittaker, quickly taking him to the ground, getting his back, and then just crushing his jaw, breaking in his lower teeth, I believe, with the squeeze that he had with the rear naked choke there. Chimaev's just a monster, man. This guy, once he gets to that grappling, and if he can get a dominant position early, more often than not, he's going to get the finish. And that's what makes him so dangerous. The question marks start coming when he has forced to go into deeper water. We saw him have to do it against Kamaru Usman. We saw him have to do it against Gilbert Burns. He still comes out on the winning end. The issue is, now that he potentially has to fight main event rounds, well, he had to potentially fight main event rounds in the past, but obviously finishing his opponents. Here against du Plessis, there's a possibility he has to go into rounds 3, 4, and 5. Historically, du Plessis has a decent durability, very hard to put away, but has he fought somebody at the level of Chimaev? Now, du Plessis, through his UFC career, has only faced 6 takedown attempts and given up 3 of them. They came against the likes of Darren Till, Derek Brunson, and Robert Whittaker. Although Darren Till and Robert Whittaker were only able to accrue about 30 seconds of control time, while Derek Brunson got 2.5 minutes of control time. So Chimaev, easily, a better grappler than all those guys put together. So maybe he has more success here. Maybe he can get to those dominant positions, and then he can find that early finish against du Plessis, so he doesn't have to find out whether du Plessis will be able to rally back and win those last few rounds or even find a finish in the last few rounds. And that's kind of the narrative that I'm going to go with in this matchup. I think Chimaev's wrestling and top pressure is going to be too much for du Plessis. I think we see Chimaev assert that dominance from jump. I think he gets that top position within 2 or 3 minutes. And then from there, I think he ends up getting the back. I think it's the rear naked choke. And I think he submits du Plessis pretty quickly. I'd go round props here and submission props for Chimaev, rounds 1 and 2. Things start to get shaky after that. Maybe a live entry on du Plessis should this fight hit that 3rd round. But I think Chimaev has the physicality to match du Plessis here. I think his grappling is better. I think his BJJ is better. And I think he'll eventually be able to find that submission over du Plessis. So give me Chimaev and new middleweight champion via submission, Khamzat Chimaev. There you guys go. Full card breakdown for UFC 319. I was supposed to drop this on Monday for you guys. And I was gearing up to start recording last night after researching the entire card for the whole day. But I looked way too tired. I was not going to come on here looking like a fucking ghost, breaking down these fights for you guys and giving a half-assed type of effort. Slept, got a workout in, got my energy high, hit record, and here we are. So that means that a couple of the segments will be moving back a day or so. The top 3 Lock of the Night candidates and Chalk or Not segment for UFC 319 will both drop on Wednesday. The quick picks will drop on Thursday, and then Friday we'll have a doubleheader of the Locky 2-Step / Locky Trinity free parlay and the prop drop. And all along that, we'll also be dropping the PFL full card breakdown probably on Wednesday, alongside the tough finale breakdowns for the 2 other fights that I did not cover on this card. And then the LFA Legacy Warriors podcast probably dropping on Thursday evening as well. So a ton of content still coming your way this week. Make sure you guys hit that subscribe if you haven't already. Hit that notification bell so you know when all this great content is dropping. And hopefully we can have a profitable week starting off with the Contender Series tonight. All right. Good luck on all your action this weekend and week, folks. I'll see you guys again tomorrow for the top 3 Lock of the Night candidates. Peace.